Well, I think it was because I felt like I needed a segue after being in the Army for 10 years to make some sort of transition. Because I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do when I left the Army. I mean, there were... I loved my work as an undergraduate, especially in kind of close reading. Props to Fred. The 3 to 5 paragraph essay that you sort of learn how to do in Fred's class is exactly the kind of work that you do as an undergraduate. Close reading of a text, coming up with arguments and ideas about the close reading of a text. And I kind of thought, like, well, wouldn't that, maybe academia is right up my alley. I'll be the next Paul Fussell. And if you don't know who Paul Fussell was, he wrote a book called The Great War in Modern Memory, which is one of the seminal pieces of scholarship about literature from the First World War. And I'd written about war elegies as an undergraduate at UVA. It was a project that I was interested in kind of continuing on into my time at Chicago, but there were other parts of me that thought, well, maybe I should be doing something outside of the academy. I could do journalism, for example. I could write, and a lot of my work was in creative nonfiction. But it didn't take long for the program to sort of suss me out, which I think is the benefit of those standalone MA programs anyways, is that it kind of allows you, if you're sort of toying with the idea of scholarship, to find a direction. And I needed that. I would come from an environment in the Army where the measure of one's intellectual strength was the ability to problem solve quickly. If you look at a map, you can kind of figure out how the enemy is going to attack or defend a piece of terrain, then you can figure out how you are also conversely going to pick apart the enemy's plan. And if you could do that with some speed and some precision and attention to detail, that's sort of the mark of your competence. I was able to do that pretty well by the end of my time in the Army. But that's not necessarily the kind of intelligence or skill set that you need to do work in the humanities. And that was a difficult paradigm shift that I had to make an adjustment to. The idea that you need to problematize everything, which means, like, rather than being able to spit out a quick solution, you kind of need to step back and look at a problem from many different angles, to keep asking questions, to not be satisfied with the first response. I think Einstein is credited with saying something that no worthy problem is solved in the plane of its original conception. And I think that that's the kind of work that you have to go back to school for to begin to figure out. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's essentially what I was doing, and I was glad that I kind of took a non-traditional route, in that I didn't necessarily stick with a thesis that was centered on work in the English department. I kind of took a hybrid approach, did creative work. At the time, I was convinced I would just be able to knock out a novel, and really started to try and write early chapters on something, and I had like big plots and things strewn up across my apartment where I was planning how to do this. They'd also had as a requirement an accompanying critical piece, and I had a lot of help there from the nonfiction faculty that I worked with, which became the genesis of the first thing that I ever had published, which was that piece in the Atlantic. Was my working with James Fallows, who's a correspondent for the Atlantic, and who was a visiting writer there my last quarter at the University of Chicago. And I didn't necessarily publish with James anything that I had been working on at the University of Chicago, but a lot of the writing that I did in the year and a half sort of afterwards, after I'd gotten married and we found out we were having a child, and then it was just all this stuff that was sort of welling up and felt really urgent, and I was really beginning to kind of work with that material, that I produced something that I thought was actually fit to put in front of an audience. Anyways, so yeah, that's a long answer for a short question, but yeah.